Hello, in this video you will learn how to use GraphQL setup in .NET APIs, the latest versions, .NET 10, Hot Chocolate, the latest versions. There are a few bits and pieces that are different as usual with GraphQL. In general, something to watch out for, just different versions. They change the syntax, they change where things need to be actually declared. So we'll go through all that and kind of see what you do in the latest versions, and in general, in case you'd be working with some older versions, what to watch out for, what might change and what might change in the future, just those basic things. And in general, we will do a query with filters, with sorting. Those are sort of two separate things here in GraphQL. And we'll take a look at mutations. Mutations is the sort of insert update part of the whole CRUD arrangement here. Now, to get started, you need to install a couple of packages. There's not much shows here, and you can certainly combine that with minimal APIs or your controllers, so you don't need a separate project necessarily. You can just, if you want to do these things, you can do that like this. Now, is it recommended or not? That's a different conversation for a probably separate video. But you can certainly mix and match them. But what you need in terms of packages, you need these hot chocolate packages. There are a few other alternatives and there are other arrangements. This is sort of main one. We have the hot chocolate 16 and you have hot chocolate 16 data, ASP.NET Core and data. Now, one thing you'll notice, there is a package, there's a few packages that are called sort of similar, but there's hot chocolate. So that is, you don't just install that, or rather you don't install it at all. What you do install is the hot chocolate.asp.NET Core and hot chocolate.data. The data you only need if you want to include sorting and filtering. If you don't include that, you won't be able to declare those options, shall we say, for the data types for the data sets that you have. Now, in terms of the example project, it's very simple. We have the domain layer as such. We have order record, we have order item, we have product item, and we have this sort of fake database thing. Nothing too interesting here. We just have some static data, just something generated in memory, essentially. For this example, perhaps we'll do some videos in the future where we expand this a bit into EF Core, but the idea would still be the same. At the end of that sort of endpoint, if you will, it's not exactly that. You want to have the IQueryable, so you're dealing directly with the database as much as possible. You don't want to do some memory arrangements. That's something quite important if you actually want to use it properly. And then there is the schema structures. It's different how you do in sort of default editor that you may have, and it will be different how you do in Postman, and also if you do React frontend, which you'll probably do if you're using this arrangement. That's going to be a bit different as well in terms of that sort of schema syntax. But we're not covering that in this video, perhaps in the future videos, next upcoming weeks. For now, just we'll just cover the sort of basics, and then we have these types. So we have this, say, create order input. Now, this is kind of like DTO. If you have an API request, then that's what it would be. Nothing too interesting here. The next thing is actually the query. We'll go to the insert and update part, but let's start from the fetching part. It's a bit more straightforward. So let's zoom in just a bit so it's easier to see. We have this query arrangement, and sometimes you will have different classes, and you'll have different classes for just one method here, or you might have several, depending on how you actually want to structure the whole thing. But we have query, and all of them get a sort of public exposed IQueryable return method. There's no asyncs, there's no awaits, we just do a raw thing, very straightforward raw thing in this case. And the main thing, of course, it returns IQueryable list as such. That's the main thing to have. The only difference is this last one. So this will take a specific parameter for filtering, and it returns not a list, it returns just a single entity. That's what it does. And then we provide the filters, we do however we want it. But here, the main difference to note, we provide the ID straight into this repo method. So it will get filtered right away. The other ones, it will also be possible to filter. That's the whole point of the query, the GraphQL queries. But here you can do it freely, so there's no restraint as such. And here we only do it maybe by ID, and then go somewhere else, filter a price or whatever it may be in this or the repository. But we definitely will have to do the ID in this case. In this case, we can just get all of the items in the list. So there's no need for filtering, there's no need for sorting. There's also paging, but we'll get to that in the later videos. So probably it's quite complicated as it is getting through this stuff. Now, if you want to use filtering, that's where filter, less and more, and we'll get into the schema later on. You'll see how that sort of differs. That's where you actually do the actual filtering. Here you just set up what you actually receive in the iQueryable, and then the filtering happens in that middleware that's handling the GraphQL arrangement. And if you do want to have the descend, ascend sorting, you'll need to use the UseSorting. However, here we have a query. So it's not a controller, it's not something, it's not that, it's not this. It needs to be declared somewhere. And that somewhere is in the program.cs. So we just have our little in-memory, fake in-memory, not even memory database, but it doesn't matter in this case. And then we have a few other things which we'll get to quite soon. But you register the query like this. First of all, we add GraphQLServer. So this is kind of like adding controllers. If you have your REST API controllers in .NET, this is like adding controllers. But then you need to register each one of those, or shall we say controllers, the query in this case, as a query type. If you had other queries, usually you sort them by certain entities, or sometimes you might want to do perhaps by context, so by database context, you might do that. There's lots of ways to go around that architecturally, but for now we just have one, so we do need to register that query. So again, this is kind of like registering controllers in general, and this is actually defining that this is controller. We don't have inheritance and the name controller or name query like a keyword like we have controllers, but this is how we do these GraphQL queries. We add query type, which is our little class there. For the filtering, yes, we declared that on each of those collections, but we also need to add filtering here, and we will need to add sorting here as well, otherwise that doesn't work. Now, one thing to note, something very important, if we go back to query, you might find some suggestions that you actually need to do like a query type like this. No, you don't. In this version, at least, you do not. Maybe some older versions at some point in some way you needed to do that, and then you don't register there. So it's kind of going back and forth, but at least here in the 16 on .NET 10, that is how you set it up. So there's no attribute on the class, but instead you add query type like this. And again, it goes back and forth, and with sort of different arrangements. That's why it's very difficult to work with this stuff sometimes. There's no denying that. It can be perhaps useful in some arrangements, but usually, especially if you are doing Blazor or something like that, just a simple REST API usually will beat all your efforts on this whole arrangement. Or perhaps at that point just go with Blazor server, which makes it all a whole lot easier. You get rid of that API and client-side interaction in your project. But those are just architectural decisions. Getting back to the whole arrangement of actually using GraphQL, that's how you set up the query. And now we can get into some other stuff, the mutations. But before we go there, once we add the services, we also need to add the MapGraphQL. So you add all these, and then this creates all the sort of routes for the GraphQL arrangement. And again, we'll get later, we'll actually take a look at the query now in the Postman, because there is a bit of a setup there. And also you can do just a sort of redirect if you have a sort of default arrangement with APIs, so that or if you enter your local host, you can get directly into GraphQL, and then you'll get into this banana cake editor. But using Postman is a lot better, and then you can write your sort of integration tests, even if you don't need them. If you're not planning to do like big integration tests, you can kind of expand it much better with Postman and save it easier rather than using this default banana cake. If you're not familiar with that, think of it more like not exactly documentation, but you can see those definitions from banana cake, but it's kind of sort of simple like Swagger arrangement in terms of GraphQL in this case. So for a Postman, in the query department at least, the idea may sort of be relatively simple and relatively straightforward. However, as mentioned previously, the syntax will be slightly different wherever you go. So here, we have products in between, a simple sort of, shall we call it integration test, if we can even do that with nothing even closer. But we have our entity products here, rather the list in a way. And then we have the query. The thing about Postman, we use body raw and we use body JSON. So it has to be JSON. It's GraphQL, but it's JSON. So we pass it as query, and then we use the whole actual syntax. So the GraphQL syntax is this part: query, products, where, order. This is the GraphQL. The other stuff is just so we can do it in Postman. Now, it makes things a bit more tricky, but just remember that you need to define it like this. And it can get even more tricky if you need to declare variables for all the integration tests, but let's just stick to that. So the other things are keywords, and you should look them up. From version to version, they might have a bit different, and different arrangements might be different. So we don't use all the sort of ampersands and all these other arrangements like we have in, say, C# programming language for and, more, less. We use GT, LT, less than, more than. So something to think about when doing these queries. And again, maybe we'll make a video on connecting with React to one of these arrangements, so we'll improve the API a bit more, and the backend part a bit more in this case, and we'll see if we can do that and explore the syntax a bit more, but just something to remember. So the definition goes quite simply: you declare the property of the object in the list, And then what does it need to have? So, okay, this is from, this is to, and the price need to be from and to, from 25 to 100. And then that's it in this case, but you could have more of this, so you could go in, and again, you can't just type it in so easily. You need to match it properly, so the volume, the stock, or whatever it may be, might be different as well. But then we have order. So order is completely different. Order is what we order from, sort by, essentially descending, ascending, D-E-S-C, A-S-C, ascending, descending. That's the order, and you can go like this further on. And then the last one, quite interesting, we forget everything else, we just say, and this is quite optional, you have ID, you have name, you have price, otherwise it will be the whole thing. This is just in anti-framework or just in basic link, this would be like select. So this would be order by descending perhaps, so you put in what you're ordering by, and this would be probably like where. Well, this part is where, but then everything becomes where in this case. So this part would actually be where in link. This would be order by, and then this would be select. So select certain parts. We don't need to return the whole thing. We just select certain parts, and that's what we fetch from the database to memory, and we get it going. So that's the query part. And again, something important to remember, this is actually JSON. In some places it will be a bit different in React. When you do it, it will be different. And in Banana Cake as well, it's a bit different. But if you want to have the actual definition, especially what products, in this case, products kind of matching as great because we have product and it becomes products. So that's great, but sometimes it doesn't match fully. So just go into Banana Cake and you will see all these definitions in the actual name. Now let's get to the mutations. For mutations, we have this simple file, mutation.cs, simple class. Something to mention as well, simple class here, simple class for query as well. No static, nothing like that. You may see those suggestions as well on the internet. It's all very misleading. It's been changed over the years with some weird sort of things. So something to watch out for. This is how we do it now. Maybe in a few months, please do leave a comment if it doesn't work anymore. If a newer version changed, then we'll delete this video and we won't bother with it anymore. But in general, this is how we do it right now with the latest versions. And you can actually get the code in Patreon, as well as you can get all the other source codes and some free courses, depending on which tier you're on. But let's get to the product. So we have add product. Add product simply takes low order and it has a product from the repo. So we inject the repo through the class. That was already done. Great. Now we take name, price, and we use add product in the repo. So we just add a product. Very simple. And as you can see, there is no attribute above anything. Nothing above mutation class, nothing above the product add product method, nothing above order, create order. Now create order is a bit of fancier method, if we will, but still, it's just basic stuff. We have the input and we have the repository injection. That's it. That's all there is to it. Nothing else to be added. The only thing is, of course, getting back into the whole program.cs, we do need to add mutation type. So mutation, essentially, when you mutate the data, so to speak, in your repository, right? The query is when you retrieve the data. That's the main difference. So mutations, you pass along the data and then you insert it somehow. In general, there are some arrangements where you can do just a simple REST API for actual insertions and deletions. Is not necessarily a great reason to perhaps even use GraphQL for that part. For retrieving data, you might argue there are better arguments for actually using it. But again, it all comes down to how much can you actually use it on the front end, because the setup is tricky. Updating it is very tricky sometimes, depending on how many versions you skip, and just one sort of tiny partial version may cause some problems. But again, if you want to use the whole full CRUD, you also need to add mutations, and then whichever definition for mutations you have. And you can play around with all this in Banana Cake editor there. Just go into /GraphQL, you'll find it, but best would probably be still Postman. And just quickly, let's get into mutation for Postman. We have app product, and something I did not mention, base URL is /GraphQL. So whatever your local host or your domain is, then /GraphQL. And there is no route as such. So it's not like controllers. You have route, sub route, whatever. It's nothing like that. You just have your add product, or in the queries, if we go say to get orders here, we have orders. So that's what you query, the orders. Everything that you assign in that program.cs there, you'll be able to access through the /GraphQL. There's no additional routing mechanism. You're just accessing those objects, and it's quite important not to have conflicts. So, although it's strictly defined, so yeah, you probably won't get into any sort of conflicting arrangement. But just getting back quickly, for mutation, instead of query, it is still going to be called query, right? In the body, in the Postman at least. It's still going to be called query, but then we use keyword mutation, and then we use essentially the method that we have in those mutation classes. And then we have string required, price required, right? And then we take them, we show what the variable is, another variable is, and then we insert them in the places where we need to insert, and essentially we'll return that stuff. So the variables that we actually insert will go here in the variables, right? So the setup in your React, probably React, usually that's how people use it. There are other options, but again, we do not recommend here to use it on Blazor. There are easier ways, so there's absolutely no reason to do that. If you have heavy sort of querying arrangement, live dashboards and things, certainly just go with Blazor server-side, much easier to work with, much quicker, and much more reliable. And as far as updates go, well, there's probably nothing to update going even from major versions, .NET 10 to .11. Here, however, you never know. It can be quite difficult, it can be quite troublesome, and it can lose you quite a bit of time with those updates. And generally speaking, just setting it all up with all the unknown errors. Now, the code will be available on Patreon, and do check out some of the other arrangements with REST APIs in .NET with the new .NET 10's, well, it's been around for a while, but .NET 10 introduced the validation in minimal APIs in .NET, so quite an interesting video there, and security video, and just general get starting to take a look at that, and we will have probably a few more videos on the GraphQL with .NET in the upcoming weeks. And that said, we will conclude this video.